Welcome, Internet, to a psychoanalytic talk, and today we're going to be talking about the concept of magical thinking, from Freud to Thomas Ogden. So this concept is very interesting, as it takes its root in one of the cases of Freud, the rat man. In this case, the rat man is going to talk about his all-powerfulness of his mind, like his ideas. Everything in his internal world is under his control. Something that Freud is then going to theorize under the concept of magical thinking. That there is a part of our psyche in which we feel that we can influence everything throughout our internal world, i.e. that our internal world could change the external world without any action, so to speak. Like, it's not about, oh, I have the feeling that I would like to do that, and then things is going to happen. It's more like, I think that, therefore this is going to happen. So here we have a clear gap, that there is no action. There is only thought and result. So here we can see that this way of thinking, if we can call it that, is kind of very infantile, in the sense that children tend to think like that if they really want something, they're going to get it, or to feel that because they think something, then it's going to happen. For example, a very common example is, for example, children that feel that they don't like their sibling. If the sibling gets hurt, they can feel guilt, because they might think that because they've had that thought, then it's the reason why the sibling got hurt. Like, that's quite typical. And in this case, we can see that in children, it's completely normal. The magical thinking has its place. I would even go so far as to say that in children, it is a good sign. It's a sign that perhaps things can still develop into a rich, internalized world. However, the child does have to start to understand that reality is not shifted by the internal world, that what he thinks is what he thinks, and that the external world isn't going to change if he doesn't press an action upon it. And even if he presses an action, it might not work. And that result of frustration is what creates a good foundation between the magical thinking that we can all have and the external reality, which is something that's different. So I said that we all have that magic thinking because we all have those infantile parts of us. It's still inside us, still exerting their influence. But because of the reality principle, we understand that it's not going to bend. And therefore, because reality is not going to bend, our magical thinking becomes a fantasy. And the fantasy is a complete positive, because it's something that allows the imagination to go, the creativity to be there, and does not constitute a threat if the person is at ease with his internal life. So that's a fundamental positive. But there are certain cases in which the magical thinking does not fade away, or not completely, meaning that some people feel that they can influence the outside world through their thought process alone. That magical thinking is going to lead to what Thomas Ogden, in this great book, Reclaiming Unlived Life Experiences in Psychoanalysis. I'm sorry, I got the title wrong, because in French it's Expérience en Analyse, so it's a very different title. But back to topic. The whole idea for Thomas Ogden is that the magical thinking condemns the individual that still uses it once adult, and which hasn't become a fantasy or another type of thinking. It condemns the individual to be in all-powerfulness, in a rejection of the external world and reality. That rejection, of course, at the pinnacle of it, is a psychotic state, in which the delusions and the hallucinations take the whole place of relational objects and external reality, meaning that everything is substituted for the delusion. But we don't have to go so far as to talk about psychosis. even in borderline or even perhaps even sometimes neurotic functionings, there can be some magical thinking. That magical thinking is a net negative for Ogden because the person is going to, by overusing that magical thinking, that person is going to isolate itself from the external world. That it's not going to be a dialogue as it should be, but it's going to be a withdrawal with one's inner world, expecting the inner world to pour out and to transform the external world. But that is going to make it even harder for an individual to deal with the frustration of it not happening, meaning that it's going to push the person further and further away. Perhaps we could make a parallel with deep schizoid states. Like, I'm not talking about schizoid personalities here, but really the ultimate extreme of schizoidness, meaning that the person only lives within their internal world. However, this is not quite magical thinking, but we can see how magical thinking can push someone further away down the line, and how the person is reduced, strangely enough, to all-powerfulness, because in their internal world they're all-powerful, therefore they can't reach out to the external world or cannot cope with that dialectic. And here I think it's very, very interesting, as this idea of someone being reduced to all-powerfulness seems very paradoxical, but it's so true, that in a way the more deprived one is with his ability to go back and forth between action and inner feelings, the more frustration is going to be built within, and that frustration, because it's going to accumulate, is going to be dealt with in more and more problematic ways. And when I mean problematic, I don't necessarily mean by acting out, but by isolating the individual, preventing them from living their lives because they're not living life as that. And Thomas Ogden points it out incredibly well. They're not living a life. They're just producing something in their minds, a construct that's not going to really feed them what they need. And that barrier is going to create a fundamental gap between them and others, meaning it's going to be even harder to reach out to others in a real, truthful way. So for Ogden, there's a real risk of losing oneself in the magical thinking. And this is a very interesting idea, as fundamentally magical thinking, when it's not in childhood and when it's not contained, has a net negative impact for the individual themselves. And the breaking, because that's another point, is that the magical thinking cuts off real relationships from forming, because you're not seeing someone else for who they are, you're just throwing in your way of seeing them, your perception of them, your belief that you can change them in fundamental ways. And this prevents any form of connection, because another person is not clay. They're not meant to be molded by the projections of another person. And that prevents everything from occurring. Everything that could be real, could be good, and could be thorough. So here I think that it's a very interesting evolution of the concept. We went from something in the world of, and in the perspective of Freud, that was completely normal and sane even for children, to something that has very complications once one reaches adulthood. And that's something that's very interesting. We can see that in a way Thomas Ogden's expansion of the concept really holds the keys perhaps to our understanding of a very regressed process in which the clinician absolutely has to reconnect and to be someone different from the magical thinking, not give in to that magical thinking, but on the contrary, to maintain their difference, because it's through that difference that the individual is going to be able to realize that there is not only the magical thinking, and we can be together without the fear of being destroyed and without the defense of being absolute, like the magical thinking does imply and does bring forward, that the connection can be true and non-destructive. So what Thomas Ogden points out is very interesting, and I think it clinically can help us to understand the more regressed people we can meet, and perhaps even try and help them by making the relationship more real and less magical, so to speak, or at least less taken in the magical thinking. And of course, here I'm not saying it's like it goes from this to that in the slip of a finger. It's more about building that relationship and building the person in order for them to be able to let go of the magical thinking. And of course, I didn't talk about it too much, but we can also make the parallel with a lot of strange atypical beliefs or sometimes scenarios that some people might have, notably people with who are more fragile. They can feel that through, I mean, it can be anything, right? It can be voodoo, for quantum gestalt, their influence and impact is just through those rituals. And in those rituals, we can already see that there is a form of magical thinking that's there. And I mean, here I use two examples, but you have to understand that telepathy, there's a whole range of them. Like, it's not religious or anything when I'm talking about magical thinking. I'm really talking about how it's a strange belief that if you do something that's completely arbitrary, something, it's not just something might happen, it's something will happen because you've done the ritual. So here it's another extension of the term of magical thinking, but it's still very relevant to the discussion. And I think that that's something that we can all witness, or we've all witnessed, even in our personal lives. People believe in such forms of influence through some kind of telepathy, or strange or perhaps unconventional beliefs. And I find that, again, very interesting, as the magical thinking allows us to understand those phenomena in perhaps a clearer way, that it's a way for the individual to maintain all powerfulness, because it's a fear of being disintegrated if they were to let go of the magical thinking. And in these cases, only a good enough relationship built over time can help the individual let go and accept that he's not all powerful. So that pretty much does it for my explanation of the concept. I hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.